You're listening to China Africa Talk.
Jambo, ni Bridget akikuletea kipindi kinachohusiana na China na Afrika.
Vous écoutez le dialogue sino-africain avec Bridget.
Everything China, everything Africa.
Olá, você está ouvindo China Africa Talk com Bridget.
سيداتي وسادتي مرحبا بكم في الحوار الصيني العربي مع بريدجيت.
Welcome back to the program. This is China Africa Talk. I'm your host, Bridget Mutambirwa, coming to you from the Chinese capital in Beijing, and I bring you discussions on what's happening with China and Africa from a Chinese and African perspective. The Communist Party of China, CPC, held a pivotal meeting from October 20th to 23rd, outlining a roadmap that will steer national development through 2030. At the fourth plenary session of the 20th CPC Central Committee, the recommendations for China's 15th five-year plan were approved, a critical blueprint that will guide the country's priorities for the next 5 years.
Five-year plans are always the way the Chinese government trying to send some messages. This is a very important one from domestic management, all the international relations.
For me, where Africa comes in, it gives some predictability, some stability, and some sense of continuity in policy options.
The recommendations reaffirm high-quality development as the central theme of China's economic and social agenda for the next 5 years, underscoring a continued focus on pursuing economic development. So, what are the implications of the CPC plenum and the five-year plan recommendations? I'm now joined by Dr. Zhou Mi, a senior research fellow at the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, and Charles Onanaiju, director of the Center for China Studies in Nigeria. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Now, begin our discussion there with you, Dr. Zhou. Could you summarize the highlights of the fourth plenary session of the 20th CPC Central Committee and its impact at both domestic and international levels?
Well, in my understanding, this meeting is a very important meeting to show the world what China is going to do in the coming 5 years. As we know that five-year plans are always the way the Chinese government trying to send some messages or trying to manage the society and economic development.
Right.
So for this one, I think the fourth one is trying to just give a systematical ways of describing what China is going to do for the next 5 years and what are our targets and what kind of measures we probably can try to find some solutions or kind of directions.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a very important one. It's have a lot of messages coming from domestic management, all the international relations, from the agriculture to the manufacturing to the services. And also we have put it in a very important role as regional integration in China, and our attitudes towards our higher level of opening up.
Charles, from your perspective, what are the most significant takeaways from this plenum and how might its decisions influence China's engagement and partnership with African nations?
Well, like you know, the plenum held, the cross of its deliberation is the 15th five-year development plan.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it is very significant in so many ways. The tradition of five-year development plan has been part of China governance process. Since 1953, it's been a consistent pattern in China contemporary governance. And no doubt it has implication for long-term planning, for strategic planning, for policy continuity, and of course, building the enabling consensus to drive stable and steady policy. Usually, every plenum has its unique character. If you remember, it was the third plenum in 1978 that gave leeway to China reforms and opening up, which was a very important turning point for the country and also for the world.
Mm-hmm.
This also set its eyes on a very crucial moment in China's development. As you know, 2035 has been understood as an important moment for China when it would have arrived at a very important juncture in its modernization drive. So development plan between 2025 to 2030 will be very, very pivotal in meeting that very important goal of achieving considerable level of modernization by 2035. So the plenum comes at a very important stage in China's political life. And some of the issues it took on were quite important and, of course, was designed to make a steady progress for China in the coming years. For me, where Africa comes in, some of the key decisions are very important. Building a unified national market, with greater strength, with greater efficiency. And with China opening more, it means that Africa can have access to a stable market that is huge, with prospect for important returns to her own economies. And also the tradition of planning. It was sometime in vogue in Africa, but most of it were swept away by the so-called neoliberal reforms in the 1990s. And it gave some predictability, some stability, and some sense of continuity in policy options. And the fact that it was discarded just on the prodding of Western institutions insisting on the reforms has put us in a circle. And I think the political integrity of the CPC and especially of its leadership has been a very important factor in ensuring that the 5-year development plan becomes an important platform to drive China sustainable development. So for the plenum we just concluded, the decisions it took to drive more high-quality development, emphasize the real economy. This is very important. It made emphasis on the real economy. In as much as it's going to foster quality development in the areas of the real economy, it ensures that the real economy become the bedrock, the foundational bedrock of Chinese economy. In contrast to what we see in most Western countries, where post-industrial economy becomes something of a bubble and bust, where it becomes dominated by the speculative and financial sector. The fact that China holds tightly to the real economy, transforming manufacturing and introducing the element of new quality productive forces, which will define both the character and nature of work and its output, remarkably underscores the resilience, the strength of Chinese economy and its focus on what matters.
Dr. Jomi, one of the outcomes of the plenum is a document of recommendations for formulating the 15th 5-year plan, which outlines China's development priorities for the next 5 years. Can you help us analyze China's development objectives in the document?
Well, first of all, I think the most important target is trying to have a high quality development.
Right.
So the high quality development is a little bit different compared with previous 5-year plans, because high quality means that we are going to use the resources more efficient and trying to give the people better opportunities or kind of jobs. I think that is on the possibilities and also the willingness for Chinese government.
Right.
Because in the past, China, when we're talking about Chinese economy, everyone know that Chinese economy is big one, larger GDP, quick development speed of the GDP. But maybe for the next 5 years, we will try to transfer from just the high speed to the high quality. That means that we are doing something different. The way of doing business is different. I think that is the real new things or new target for the next 5 years. And trying to follow with the high quality, we are still trying to stick to our principles of the openness and also trying to welcome, the investors or different stakeholders from other countries. So we are still trying to stick to that principle. I want to mention that because, nowadays, the world is under pressure for the uncertainty from protectionism. So if China is still willing to open our market, I think that will be very important for many countries to do the businesses. And it also are a kind of important ways for us to also to attract more elements or having the ideas from other countries, other enterprises who want to do business here, even to do some innovation based on our industrial abilities. I think that is an important one. And the third one, I think that is also important for the target, that is domestic market. Because, in the past, China is mainly as a player in the world economy, we are mainly our producer, we are a manufacturer. So in the coming 5 years, we are trying to strengthen the domestic market, trying to encourage the development of the consumption, and also trying to make it big and strong. I think that is a very new kind of phrase to describe China's domestic market. We are trying to give the world more opportunities, like for import and other issues. I think that is really important.
Charles, looking at the emerging priorities of China's next 5-year blueprint, what specific opportunities do you identify for African economies, and how can African businesses and governments strategically position themselves to engage with these new priorities?
Well, just like I said, one of the key decisions of the plenum, the idea of a unified national market. And in the unified national market, the plenum outlined the interaction of supply and demand. It talks about greater demand, greater supplies, where more investment also drive consumption, creating a virtuous circle that ensures the stability of the unified national market. And the unified national market will be stable. The unified national market is not autarky, is not a close-up. It has to do with greater opening. And that's where African prospects become even more clearer. With a very integrated domestic market that is unified and giving access to African countries, as China has done recently, if you remember, at the 4th edition of China African Trade and Economic Expo, the Chinese side proposed removal of tariffs from all 52 African countries so that they could have concessional access to the Chinese market. So with a unified market that is stable, that is huge, the prospects of Africa getting into this market and making very significant return to both their national aggregate become even more guaranteed. So for me, the stability of China unified national market, the size of it, the economy of scale that has to come with integrated national market has very bright prospects for African growth in trade. And especially at the point of tariff wars, at the point of volatility in the international trade, the factor of a Chinese national unified market with access for African countries is quite a huge opportunity that I believe Africa should leverage. So the unified national market that will be robust, and then the access to it that has been more or less guaranteed, provide a very high prospect for African countries. So it is my view African countries should leverage, should take advantage, should clearly understand this and follow up and engage very robustly to the prospect of a Chinese unified national market that is more widely open for African countries. So for me, it holds quite prospects for African countries. And more also, it offers lessons that building an integrated market is the only way to build, to guarantee against shocks arising from disruption in international markets. Are we also creating integrated market by defining the various sectors? And like you see, it is not just the supply side economics, but in this side, the demand side economics, because China, by building a unified market, we will increase incomes so that people can effectively demand goods. And in demand, we create supply. So this value circle, in my view, has something to do with economic planning and management in Africa, where the emphasis has been supply side economics, where workers' wages are permanently frozen, where incomes are perpetually low. This does not make room for an integrated market in which effective demand stimulates supply. China is showing the way that a demand side economy can actually create stability and instigate greater supplies and also open the way for more investment. So beyond the prospects of African access to China's huge market, there is also the important lesson that reforms can focus on the issue relevant to the respective economies. Reforms can also aim at building an integrated market in which demand and supply are made to be compatible with each other. I think this is a very, very important lesson for African economies, especially for those undergoing reforms. Reforms must proceed from the reality of an integrated national market.
Dr. Joe, to build a modernized industrial system and reinforce the foundations of the real economy is a top priority. What message does the emphasis on the real economy convey?
I mean, a real economy is, the basis for us to develop. While, Chinese manufacturing is very strong, I think manufacturing is helping the world to overcome so many uncertainty or, the fluctuation of this cooperation. So real economy is one of the bases. Since China has so many people, we are helping to provide them with more jobs. And that is what we are started from and what we are capable of.
China also seeks to achieve greater self-reliance and strength in science and technology, as well as guide the development of new high-quality productive forces. Now, what role is technological innovation playing in driving China's modernization, and which specific industries hold the most potential for breakthrough growth in this new era?
Yes, it is true. If you're looking at China's new development concepts, the first phase, first word is innovation. So as a super large country in the world, we have to try to find our own solution in dealing with so many challenges and trying to make the better opportunities. For the science and technology, I think that there may be several ways for China to do that. The first one is we have public research and also to help the science development on those things like the national or the state laboratories for the science research. And also we are supporting the research institutions in dealing with the plans for the science and research projects every year. And I think the second force coming from the small and medium-sized enterprises or the private sectors. The private sectors in China are competing very hard with each other and also the rest of the world. So they are trying to find their way of doing some new things, new products, new services, new solutions. So they are based on the market. They are trying to find the better way to attract consumers and also meet the demand around the world, like Huawei or other, DJI. Many of these companies are private-driven or market-driven economy. And the third one, I think that is very clear that China will not just do that things by ourselves. We open our market. Right. We welcome people from other countries to also be involved in the research and development. I think that is a kind of very important forces for us to do a better research based on the technology, based on the abilities around the world. And that is very helpful for us also to meet the demand in other countries and other markets.
Charles, besides a focus on domestic resilience, China has also committed to opening its doors wider. How do you interpret this dual approach, and what practical steps can African countries take to leverage China's open policies for mutual and shared development?
Well, I have always maintained that both China and Africa are opportunities. Also maintain that China is a historic opportunity for Africa, in the sense that we have very important political understanding. We have history of working together, and we proceed almost from the same point of departure, victims of violent colonial domination, and then find our voices as sovereign countries, and then taking the idea of self-reliance as the most important starting point.
Right.
So I think all this counts in our cooperation with each other. And the opportunity that China presents, especially with the new outlook, with the prospects of her 5-year development plan that takes off effectively from next year, simply means that China remains a very robust opportunity for Africa. But what is important is for African countries to understand this, for us to design and tailor policies that maximize the opportunity of China, especially as it goes up more generously to Africa with concessional access to African goods. That is now almost done by the removal of tariff for African countries. So for me, this is very significant. But the challenge is for Africa to maximize it, to put yourself in a position where you can maximize these assets, where you can maximize the opportunities of this concessional access to Chinese food market. And what it simply means is for us to pay attention to the relevant sectors. Like I said, I was absolutely excited by the emphasis. Despite being at almost a post-industrial age, China maintains that it will continue to lay emphasis and give the relevant attention to the real sector. And what is the real sector? The real sector is that sector that holds the economy, that sector that creates values.
Yeah.
So it's not just a matter of reshuffling money.
Yeah.
It's not financial speculation. It's about a sector that generates and creates values. And it is actually this value that becomes wealth. It is not just money. It is the values created by the real sector that constitute the real wealth. So for me, this is very incisive. This is very significant, especially for some African countries that have been driven to build what I call financial bubbles. Financial bubbles, they have their lifespan. Their fate is tied to their opposite, which is bust. So I think the experience in Chinese economic planning, in which emphasis is continuously laid on the real sector. But this sector is not stagnant. This sector, like the memo, like the communique of the plenum suggested, will be completely overhauled, will be infused with new energy, will be driven to higher levels. And we see the emergence of new quality productive forces. What is new quality productive forces? The definition of the new work, the new agents of the new work. So both the quality of the agents of the new work and the output of the new work will be qualitatively improved. So this is very, very important. And I believe that African countries, despite the opportunity of access to Chinese food market, despite the enigmatic cooperation between the two sides, will have to continuously pay attention to some of these things because they have universal implication for economic planning. They have universal implication for sustainable economic development. This idea of scientifically understanding the trend and aligning the trend to your own reality and defining a concrete roadmap in which this benefits the people has been the hallmark of China's economy, especially most exemplified in the 5-year development plan. Since its inception in 1953, the 5-year development plan has been an important mechanism for driving sustainable continuity in Chinese national economy. And I think it has universal implication, especially for African countries.
Still on you there, Charles. The plenum also highlighted goals for agricultural modernization and comprehensive rural revitalization. Now, given that agriculture is the backbone of many African countries, what key lessons or adaptable models can Africa draw from China's experience to ensure its own sustainable agricultural development?
Well, just like we were discussing, because the China development trajectory is very, very realistic, is not presumptuous. China's economic outlook has been comprehensive in the sense that, of course, the communique made mention about paying attention to rural revitalization as an important framework in the end of the poverty, because it is not just ending poverty, but ensuring that those who were lifted out of poverty never fell back to it. So there is clear-eyed program of emphasizing rural development and, of course, paying attention to those who are there. And agriculture, in fact, despite China's development level, despite how far it has gone, is still considered agriculture very foundational. So this, for me, is very important in Africa. Where you see people these days, it is the banks that lead the way, that make all the profit, creating what I call financial bubble. And financial bubble, how attractive and beautiful it looks, has the tendency to burst sooner or later. But in China's case, you can see that the strategic core of the economy, which is the real economy, consisting of industry and agriculture, are paid utmost attention. There are policy frameworks to advance them, to refine them, to improve them, to get them move along. And this is very important. So for me, agriculture, rural development should be at the core of policy making in Africa. It should be emphasized. And the fact that China, despite heavy industrialization and even entering the era of post-industrialization, is paying a lot of attention to agriculture and rural economy means that its economic outlook is wholesomely integrated. That is what we should do. If you balance the sectors, you will maximize the contribution of each sector of the economy. You maximize the benefits. So it is important that African countries, why they focus or why they continuously move on the part of industrialization, it is important to pay very serious attention because this sector is organic. You must create linkages where the primary sector also feeds the secondary sector.
Right.
Secondary sector should also be integrated with the tertiary sector.
Right.
This planning is all along without creating isolation, with building synergy among the various sectors of the economy. And even if you read the communique, the China also talk about maximizing the economy of scale, maximizing the comparative strength of various regions to enable their maximum contribution to the overall national economic development. This is an important lesson for Africa. Harnessing regional economy, harnessing the regions, harnessing the state, harnessing the provinces, harnessing them, building a synergy across the various subsets, the various subunits in the country, so that become active economic agents whose energy are synergized for the overall growth of the economy. So these are very important lessons. Reading through the community, it became very obvious that China understands. China neither want to jump away too much, but nor does it also remain static. You could see change and continuity. You could see the strength in the traditional sectors of the economy, but you can also see ambition in the effort to move forward. This ambition is not reckless. This confidence is not reckless. It is reinforced by the critical foundation of the economy, which have been built over time. The resilience, the instant resilience of the economy is the foundation on which the optimism of driving a much more deeper reforms, much more quality development is built. So for me, these are important lessons.
Right.
I wish policymakers in Africa can pay attention. Of course, nobody is asking for anybody to replicate what the Chinese are doing. That's true. But for me, some of these things have universal lessons. They have universal implications.
Dr. Joe, in a global environment often marked by uncertainty, unilateralism, and protectionism, China's consistent use of 5-year plans provides a clear long-term policy framework. What is the broader significance of this model for policy certainty?
Well, it's really important, when especially the companies, when they are going to make the decision, they have to take care about the time. Like if they want to invest in somewhere, they have to not just look at the next 1 year, 2 years. They have to take maybe 5 years, 10 years. So for the longer term, I think that is a very important for the people to make the decisions and reduce average cost of doing that. So for the 5-year plans, it's a pretty long time for many sectors or companies to operate. For this message is coming from China, I think the 5-year plans will stick to its principle because every 5 years, at the end of these 5 years, we will review about what the targets have been met and what kind of things we haven't finished. So this message really are an important mechanism for the people to look at the promises of Chinese government, and they were also trying to believe that. Because, when we're seeing other government, they are saying something, and another government just change everything. So they cannot be trusted. I think that is a problem. So for the investors, they need this kind of certainties.
I'd like to also hear your thoughts, Charles. While acknowledging different national contexts, are there aspects of China's governance and planning approach that you would advocate for African countries to consider and adapt?
Yes, of course, like you could see, China pays attention to the international environment. It looks at it and takes measures. If you see the idea of building a unified national economy, it progressed from concept of double circulation. The double circulation also proceeds from the concept, the new normal. These are various understanding of the economic, various understanding of the global trends, and takes note of these evolving trends, putting the relevant resilience, create the relevant resilience, domestic resilience, so that it can protect against the strong winds of this disruption, the strong wind of these shocks. And it did that. So paying attention to emerging global trends are very important in building a policy, especially designing policy resilience that could withstand shocks, that could withstand volatility. that could withstand turbulence on the international system, especially at a point where most of the disruptions are politically motivated. Like trade disruption, all these are politically motivated. A way of reasserting Western supremacy, the Western primary national election, which objectively is not the case. So one must build resilience. So if you see, most of the decisions were designed not only to build resilience against some of these shocks, but even to thrive amidst them, even within the context of the shocks. And that is where the paramountcy or the primacy of building a unified national market, comes in. Like I said, it is not autocracy, it is not China shutting itself from the world. It is rather a strong China being more open to the world. It's a unified national market, a stronger China, but with greater and wider opening to the world, which means China will continue to present herself as an opportunity to the world. A contributor to the global stability, already contributing almost 30% to global growth. I think this is what it built itself. So while building domestic resilience to withstand shocks, it's still an open opportunity to the rest of the world. So for me, it's also another important lesson, like I said.
Right.
For African countries, you must anticipate these trends. You must pay attention to these trends because they are preceded. The trends are almost very obvious. The direction is almost very obvious that if you pay attention, you can decipher them. And when you decipher them, you build resilience against its worst excesses. I think that's where the political sagacity, the profound vision, and of course, competence of the Chinese leadership comes to play. And for me, these are not the property of any particular part of the humanity. Anybody who searches very diligently, anybody who takes his job and who takes governance very serious can see also some of these things before they even begin to happen. So the international environment is a very significant factor that must always be taken into account when designing domestic policies. And China has done that very excellently. And it is my view that African countries should also continue to pay attention with the external environment.
Well, that brings us to the end of our discussion there. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Listeners, you can subscribe to our online newsletter on CGTN or Substack to get more insights on China-Africa relations. Just search China-Africa Talk. For now, it's goodbye. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others. Post it on social media or leave a rating and review. Thanks again. See you next time.